Isaiah 19 begins with the total physical destruction of a hostile nation and ends with God calling that same enemy, my people. To understand how a nation goes from total ruin to divine covenant, we track how God dismantles their society, step by step. For an ancient Israelite, the chapter starts exactly as expected, with swift judgment against their oppressors. Verse 1 reads, "The burden of Egypt. Behold, the Lord rideth upon a swift cloud, and shall come into Egypt, and the idols of Egypt shall be moved at his presence." The physical statues of their gods topple. This map shows how that spiritual failure immediately bleeds into political ruin. Verse 2 continues, "And I will set the Egyptians against the Egyptians, city against city, and kingdom against kingdom." Historically, this points to a period called the Dodecarchy, where Egypt fractured into 12 warring factions, fighting intensely among themselves. The internal bleeding makes them easy prey. In verses 3 and 4, Isaiah states, "The spirit of Egypt shall fail, and the Egyptians will I give over into the hand of a cruel lord, and a fierce king shall rule over them." Their traditional magicians and council offer no defense against a unified invading empire. This foreign subjugation materialized repeatedly in history. Invaders like the Assyrians and the Persians swept in, placing a heavy yoke on the fractured Egyptian state and turning a once proud superpower into a client kingdom. The failure of their idols and their human leadership leaves the nation stripped of its autonomy. With the political structure broken, the stage is set for a much deeper systemic collapse. Next, the judgment extends to the environment itself. Verse 5 states, "And the waters shall fail from the sea, and the river shall be wasted and dried up." In Egypt, the Nile is the absolute baseline of life. This schematic illustrates why a drought was a military crisis. Verses 6 and 7 say, "And they shall turn the rivers far away, and the brooks of defense shall be emptied and dried up." These brooks were embanked artificial canals functioning as defensive moats. When the Nile failed, their fortress walls were suddenly exposed. As the diagram pans to the surrounding economy, we see the ripple effects. Verses 8 through 10 tell us, "The fishers also mourn, and they that work in fine flax shall be confounded." With no fish to eat and no flax to weave, starvation and poverty set in. The common people languish. The physical environment mirrors the spiritual drought. By taking away the water, the judgment actively dismantles Egypt's reliance on their naturalistic gods, forcing them to face a crisis their pantheon cannot solve. Even their renowned intellectuals are useless. Verses 11 through 15 describe the legendary princes of Zoan and Noph as fools who are deceived. Their counsel becomes brutish, and they cause Egypt to stagger like a drunken man in every work they attempt. This strategic map traces the immediate threat that exposes their failing wisdom. Verses 16 and 17 declare that the land of Judah shall be a terror unto Egypt. Judah isn't invading, rather the unstoppable Assyrian war machine is marching right through Judah, directly toward the Egyptian border. Pause the video here. Based on the total environmental collapse and the failure of their wisest leaders described in verses 5 through 17, how does physical desperation prepare a nation for a spiritual shift? Hitting absolute rock bottom is a painful prerequisite. When the economy, the military defenses, and the intellectual class all fail simultaneously, the deep-seated idolatry of the nation fractures, leaving them searching for a genuine source of salvation. This brings us to the pivot. In verse 18, Isaiah says, "In that day shall 5 cities in the land of Egypt speak the language of Canaan." Hebrew, the language of the covenant, begins taking root inside Egyptian borders. Verse 19 continues, "In that day shall there be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt." Historically, the Jewish priest Onias built a functioning temple to God in Egypt at Leontopolis, constructed directly over the ruins of pagan sites. The integration goes deeper. Supported by the Ptolemaic kings, the massive Jewish population in Egypt translated the Hebrew scriptures into Greek, creating the Septuagint and spreading biblical texts throughout the Hellenistic world. This flowchart breaks down the theological mechanism driving the entire chapter. Verses 20 through 22 explain that the Lord shall smite Egypt, he shall smite and heal it, and they shall return, and he shall be entreated of them, and shall heal them. The devastation we saw in the first half of the chapter was the exact tool needed to clear the land of idols. It allowed a true altar and the genuine knowledge of God to flourish where it was once impossible. This map highlights the final, eschatological shock of Isaiah 19. In verses 23 through 25, God grants Israel's fiercest historical oppressors titles reserved only for the covenant people, saying, "Blessed be Egypt my people, and Assyria the work of my hands, and Israel mine inheritance." Staying on this map, we see how Palestine transforms from a bloody battleground into a connection point. The prophecy states, "There shall be a highway out of Egypt to Assyria, and the Egyptians shall serve with the Assyrians." The three hostile powers become a unified threefold cord. So when you read this chapter, track the progression. First, the nation is smitten to break its idolatry. Second, it is healed through the introduction of a true altar. Third, it is united with former enemies in worship. Isaiah demonstrates that divine judgment here is not about permanent destruction. It operates as the ultimate tool for redemption, systematically dismantling false systems to unite a fractured world under one God.